We will have 3 presentations. First by Dr. Aline Sierp, Fluid Boundaries, the European Union as Memory Region. Aline Sierp is Assistant Professor in European Studies at Maastricht University. The next speaker will be Sarah Correia, from the London School of Economics and Political Science. And she will present a paper, Remembering Srebrenica in the United Kingdom in the context of the government-sponsored struggle against radicalization among British Muslims. And the third is the presentation, Transnational Politics of Memory in a Troubled National Context, Media Commemoration on 23rd August in Romania by Alina Thiemann and Valentina Pricopie from the Institute for Social Research in Frankfurt am Main, and Valentina Pricopie is a professor in communication studies and senior researcher at the Institute of Sociology in Romania. And the comments will be given by Professor Jeffrey Olick. We will start with the first speaker, Aline Sierp.
Okay, you're almost there. It's the last panel. What I would like to do in this presentation is a little bit stretch this whole idea of memory regions, and I decided to talk about the European Union as a memory region. I think we can all agree that for decades the idea of coming to terms with the past has really been one of the uncontested prerogatives of the sovereign nation state. In addition to that, you often have the observation that Europe is not a nation, or the European Union is not a nation, and that unlike nation states, it cannot draw upon a common source of historical narratives. This made a lot of scholars conclude that memory and identity building processes can really only effectively take place on the national level. As a consequence, and we are all familiar with this because we have discussed this extensively in the last 2 days, as a consequence, a lot of existing research concentrates on the national level and is overlooking the fact that a lot of memories are actually formed in discursive arenas that often lie above and below the nation state. So what I will try to do is investigate the fluidity of existing memory boundaries by concentrating on the construction of memory regions on the European Union level. And you can only do that if you question at the same time the extent to which a European memory is different from a national memory. So what will I do? I will analyze different EU politics of memory initiatives, so EU policies, if you so want, on the one hand, and I will also refer to the national reactions to them on the other, in order to scrutinize the actual variance between the 2 different dimensions. My key hypothesis in this context is that a European perspective is trying to break the mold of single national perspectives by integrating them into a common identity and value frame. And it's through the promotion of social interactions at the subnational level and the creation of a communicative arena that the EU is acting as a facilitator for the transnationalization of debates on memory, creating a memory regions that lie above the fixed boundaries of the nation state. My main argument is really that the difference between European and national memory is not so much one of nature, but of form, and that the observations about the difficulty of creating a uniform memory framework on the national level, and we have heard a lot about this in the last 2 days, are therefore not easily transferable to the European level. To give you a little bit of theoretical background about national or political memory, you're probably all familiar with the different levels of memory that have been developed particularly by the Assmans. National or political memory, and this is a form of cultural memory, if you so want, is anchored in political institutions. It's usually supported by symbols, and it strives for uniformity and unambiguousness. It tends to constantly negotiate between available historical records and current social and political agendas in order to achieve stability and homogeneity. I think its most important characteristic is simplification. However, it's not unidimensional. National memory is often the medium and the outcome of continuous struggles over symbolic power of contested representations. Now, the question is, if we take this as a given, to what extent these are universal characteristics of political memory in general? If it does apply also to the supranational level, and this obviously raises the question of whether a European memory is fundamentally different from a national memory. Let's talk very quickly about the EU's memory, or the EU memory framework. I think we can say, if you're a little bit familiar with European integration, that from the very beginning, the European political elites have tried to add a transnational layer to national identities and memories. And they usually use three different reference points. One is European heritage, usually stressing the role of a common culture. Then it's a teleological narrative of European integration in itself. And the third one is the two world wars, the experience of dictatorship as a founding myth. The first element was particularly strong in the 1970s, so this focus on a common heritage. It was the moment when culture acquired a new meaning as a glue that could hold Europeans together in times of crisis. Obviously, the 1970s were the moment of economic downturn, of something that was called later on Eurosclerosis. And culture and common heritage then suddenly started to acquire particular importance. The second element, the teleological narrative of European integration itself, is still there, but it certainly failed to catch people's minds and hearts. And the third one is maybe the one that was most successful in this respect. It was particularly important in the 1950s. If you look at the early treaties, at the early speeches that were held, they all make reference to World War II. It lost a little bit of importance during the Cold War for very obvious reasons. This was the moment when Europe was divided, but also bound together by this ideological context. And it certainly came forcefully back with the fall of the Berlin Wall. And this was also the moment when a new element arrived, the Holocaust, which really had been of no significance for early Western integration, but then turned into the central point of reference for defining the values and political goals of the European Union. This was the moment when the European Parliament passed several resolutions specifically addressing World War II and the Holocaust. And I think we can say that by the time of the Stockholm International Forum in 2000, EU memory policies had started to revolve around the idea that both experiences had changed Europeans' understanding of civil liberties and individual human rights. The predominance of the Holocaust frame was not really challenged until the Eastern enlargement in 2004. And this was the moment when a competing memory framework came to the fore, according to which the experiences of suffering under Nazism and Stalinism are comparable and should as such receive equal recognition. This so-called divided memory has previously been analyzed either within the framework of claims making or policy conflict. I, however, think that this is not the full picture. The requests by Central and Eastern European states are more than the simple frustration with a Western-dominated discourse. They are closely connected to the assurance of full membership within the European Union. And if you look closely, particularly at debates in the European Parliament, you can see clearly that they are framed as an identity issue. Now, the aggressiveness, and this is not new to you, of the requests by Central and Eastern European MEPs were met with a lot of resistance. There was the fear of relativization and trivialization of the Holocaust on the one hand, and the externalization of any kind of responsibility on the other. The at times fiercely conducted debates in the different policy forums are usually cited as evidence that a European memory cannot exist because of the mere existence of fundamental different memory narratives. Now, I'd like to have a closer look at this. If you look at the EP resolutions and the different initiatives, particularly by the European Commission, you can clearly see that on the European level, this is not about the simple integration of European histories by finding the lowest common denominator. Rather than following a rationale, it rather follows a rationale that divorces itself from the question of differing historic experiences and moves to a meta level. Europe's bloody divisive history is seen as a catalyst for the definition of values that have the power to unite the peoples of Europe despite the very different connotations which the experience of totalitarianism have had in their national contexts. So to give one concrete example, all resolutions on racism, xenophobia, and anti-Semitism make references to the lessons learned from the past. This is the moment when past becomes translated into political action. So instead of trying to harmonize and monopolize the highly heterogeneous memories into a European master narrative, particularly the European Commission is trying to act as a facilitator for debates and makes a forum available within which different memories can be exchanged and listened to. And you cannot see this very much on the level of official statements and past resolutions, but you can see this clearly if you look at the concrete efforts to actively frame the emergence of a European-wide memory initiatives. It's particularly the European Commission program Europe for Citizens that uses the rearm of memory as a mechanism for public sphere formation. So the 2007 to 2013 program of the Europe for Citizens program had 4 actions, and one of them was called Active European Remembrance. The new program, 2014 to 2020, has only 2 program strands. One is democratic engagement and civic participation, and the second one is European Remembrance. Funding for the latter increased substantively when they passed the new program description. Now, it's the belief that an open memory culture thrives only with citizens' engagement, because there's this belief that an open memory culture thrives only with citizens' engagement. The aim of the program is to mobilize grassroots action by research institutes, by museums, by human rights organizations, and by civil society associations. And it's particularly through the promotion of citizens' initiatives and thus targeting a level that lies below the official state level, and I think that's the interesting thing here. A civil understanding of history is being aimed at that allows for an active exchange between different memory cultures, facilitating that way processes of transmission and convergence in the wider European context. This obviously does not mean that debate and conflict are excluded. On the contrary, I would argue that it's precisely the development of a democratic culture of discussion, the possibility to exchange different opinions and to confront disagreements over historical narratives that constitutes the particular European element of a European perspective on memory. This is obviously not happening in a void. You cannot only talk about EU policies if you do not also look at national reactions to this. I don't have enough time to go much into detail here, but what we can see is that public commemorations of World War II have changed in the past 2 decades. If you look at national commemoration rituals, you can see that the wider European context has begun to permeate national reflections on questions of responsibility and guilt. Commemorations have become increasingly transnational, paying homage not only to national victims, but often stressing also the European dimension of the experience of war and dictatorship. Now, to what extent this is actually taking place, we can discuss, of course, but it is there. If you look at the European Commission program, you can see that the number of applications for projects with a cross-national character have augmented substantially in the past decade. So to conclude and to go back to the theoretical framework that I've outlined at the beginning, where it said that one of the main characteristics of political memory is that it strives for uniformity and ambiguousness, And that is also the reason why usually homogenization and simplification go hand in hand with the construction of a national commemorative. The EU has certainly often been accused, particularly by the Central and Eastern European countries, of following the same rationale. Now, most scholars have interpreted these memory clashes at the European level as examples of the impossibility of creating a European memory framework. As we have seen, however, it is precisely because there are conflicts of interpretation and precisely because looking at events from a single perspective proves to be impossible within the European context, the EU is attempting to find an alternative way of dealing with memory issues that can be best described with the motto dialogue and exchange. It tries to break the mold of single national perspectives by integrating such perspectives into a common identity and value framework where they can coexist without provoking new sources of conflict. I think in this respect, European memory is fundamentally different from national memory. And we can also say that memories have clearly started to form in discursive arenas that lie above the nation state. We can thus rightly speak of the EU as a memory region. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And our next speaker will be Sarah Correia.
Thank you very much. And I think that my paper will very much follow the theoretical framework that was just presented, because it's a case study. It's called, can you put the, sorry. It's called Warsaw Representation. So it's called Remembering Srebrenica in the United Kingdom in the context of the struggle against radicalization of British Muslims. So Srebrenica has become one of the focal points through which the 92-95 Bosnian War came to be recalled in Western Europe, grounded on judicial decisions that classified the Srebrenica massacre as genocide. In 2009, the European Parliament approved the resolution institutionalizing the 11th of July, date of the fall of Srebrenica, as a day of commemoration of Srebrenica genocide. The decision reflected as well as reinforced the status of Srebrenica as an element of an emerging trans-European public memory. This paper will analyze the case of an initiative called Remembering Srebrenica that takes place in the United Kingdom since 2013, organized by a British Muslim NGO with funding from the British government. The launch of this initiative coincided not only with the renewed interest by the British government in the political situation in Bosnia in the present, but also with an increasing concern about radicalization amongst sections of the British Muslim population in the context of the ongoing war in Syria and the rise of the so-called Islamic State. Thus, the duty of memory to remember Srebrenica has been put to the service of ongoing debates in the UK about Muslim identity and the place of Muslims in Europe. Bosnians themselves have virtually no influence on how remembering Srebrenica commemorates Srebrenica, other than by providing the raw material for acts of remembrance. So before I start, I just very quickly say, so you had the war in Bosnia. The Serb forces very quickly got hold of 70% of the territory. And after that, for 3 years, you had shiftings front lines. And Srebrenica was one of the enclaves that was besieged by Serb forces. And in July 95, that enclave fell, after which there was a massacre in which more than 8,000 Bosniak or Bosnian Muslim men and boys and a few women were executed. And this has been now, thanks to the ICTY, ICJ, but also European Court of Human Rights, it is now considered a genocide from juridical perspective. For specifically for our conference, I see we have here three memory regions that overlap somehow. So we have this trans-European memory, of which Aline has just spoken, and very much identified the mechanisms that are present in this case study. And we have another region of memory that is the UMA, as a memory region that is formed by Brotherhood of Muslims. And then we have, of course, the memory region of the Balkans that is not only regional, but is also this highly symbolic European other, as Maria Todorova has framed it in her seminal work, Imagining the Balkans. So these three dimensions interact in the dynamics of collective memory, and they interact amongst themselves, but also they interact with the lived experience of those who survived the siege and the massacre of Srebrenica. So here you see that Srebrenica is actually also extremely main focal point also in Bosnia about remembering the war, and every year you have a mass collective burial that is attended by thousands, tens of thousands of people. It depends from year to year, but it can reach even 50,000 people. This picture is from 2008. And so in 2009, the European Parliament passed this resolution that institutionalized the 11th of July as date of fall of Srebrenica as European Day of Commemoration of the Srebrenica genocide, seen as the best means of paying tribute to the victims of the massacres and sending a clear message to future generations. So this is also in the context of increased role of the European Union in stabilizing the transition process in the Balkans. And so what is interesting about this is that they make it trans-European, that they exhort the states, the member states of the European Union, to hold national commemorations. And now, of the 27 European member states, now 28, only the United Kingdom followed the recommendation of the European Parliament. And this is quite strange because the United Kingdom is a reluctant member of the European Union. And so I'm exploring why this has happened, especially because the government is very committed in this commemoration. They have allocated 2 million pounds already for this commemoration. And this despite the policy of financial austerity that the Conservative government has been implemented in the last few years. So for my paper, now I'm going to go back a bit and explore briefly the public mobilization in the UK in favor of the government of Bosnia during the war, just to give some historical perspective. And you see this is very famous picture in 92 of Prijedor when a British TV uncovered the existence of concentration camps in the area of Prijedor. As you can see, it was immediately resonated, and the media presented it as a repetition of the Holocaust. And despite an awareness that these things were happening, the war lasted, as you know, for many years, for more than 3 years, and escalated into violence that killed 100,000 people, of which 30,000 Muslim non-combatants. So in the United Kingdom at the time you had a lot of activism in favor of the Bosnian government. You had also some activism in favor of the Serbs, but I'm not exploring it now. Importantly for our case here, it seems that the case of the Bosnian War was lived in a very particular way by British Muslims at the time. So according to Ed Hussein, at the time a student who found, sorry, I will just take, excuse me, the picture. According to Ed Hussein, at the time a student who found in the Bosnian War the trigger for radicalization, a common perception amongst Muslims was that if white-skinned indigenous European Muslims were left to be slaughtered, nobody would ever defend the British Muslims, who came from an immigrant background and had a darker skin. So they projected onto Bosnia their own racialized view of ethnic relations in Britain. And so for some groups, they had a slogan called Bosnia today, Brick Lane tomorrow. So you can see. But anyway, these were quite marginal, and most of the activism amongst Muslims had to do more with charities and humanitarian help, or also collecting money, that some of which was used to buy weapons for the Bosnian government. But it is known that hundreds of British Muslims went to the war and fought there as foreign combatants. There were also non-Muslims who fought on either sides, just to make it in its context. But in terms of political activism more openly, the political choices by large of the British Muslims were very largely determined by their participation in patronage networks, so-called biraderi networks, that were dominated by community leaders with links to British political parties, who were most concerned in avoiding frictions with the state. So overwhelming majority of British Muslims took a very low profile during these times, but of course times changed, and now the situation is different because since September 11 we have had a rise in the politicization of political awareness among the British Muslims, and we have very strong debates about either Muslim extremism, also the term Islamophobia. And a lot of people, some analysts as well, have retrospectively assigned to the Bosnian War this role of founding moment in the politicization of British Muslims and of radicalization of segments of the Muslim population. The fact is that amongst the younger sections, Bosnia seems to have a very emotional appeal in terms of this politicization, and this regardless of, it doesn't mean that the person is a radical, but Bosnia now has that place. So you see also by this that it's still nowadays, even this is from 2011, it's still a popular theme, because if the Daily Mail is publishing, it's because there is an audience that is interested in commemorations in Bosnia. So, So after the London bombings in 2007, the government, the British government at the time, Labour government, they had already this policy called contest since the 9/11, but they upgraded it quite strongly. And I'm focusing here specifically on the last point, the called prevent point. And this prevent point had as a goal to respond to the ideological challenges of terrorism and those who promote it, and prevent people from being drawn to terrorism by working with sectors and institutions that are at risk of radicalization and which the government needs to address. So of course in the strategy the word Muslim is never written, but because of this prevent strategy, nowadays many British Muslims feel that they are under mass surveillance. So, for instance, under this prevent strategy, health professionals have received training, and they have to report to the authorities any suspicion of someone radical. And now also school teachers and head teachers also have to report to the police if they suspect that some student is radicalized. So you've been having situations of even 8-year-old children being reported and interrogated by the police because, I mean, the most recent was a child, was not even Muslim. He heard the teacher told about the Syrian war, and then the next day he wrote on his homework that he wants, when he grows up, he wants to fight terrorism. And they called the police for this. So this means that contrary to the apparent goals of such a strategy, the trust between Muslims and the state is now severely diminished. And I'm speculating, because this is an ongoing research, but this is something I will inquire, but the government may have felt the need for measures providing reassurance and meet the perceived concerns of the Muslim population. So you see, this is from the government's website. You see projects to support tackling extremism and intolerance, and you have the Anne Frank Trust UK, you have the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, and you can see 1 million to the Holocaust Memorial. You have this measuring Islamophobia, this Thiemann. You have new Holocaust Commission that government is going to create a museum, and you have Remembering Srebrenica. So, as they say, project raises awareness of Srebrenica genocide to teach the consequences of hatred and intolerance. And this is framed in these very, very vague terms of hatred, intolerance, and in official documents or also in the website of this organization, you will not find what I actually mean by that. So Remembering Srebrenica, this organization that was created in 2013, is intended to target, above all, people with moderate ideological positions about life in common in a multicultural society, regardless of religious affiliation. But it remains nevertheless a Muslim initiative set up by the Muslim charity Ummah Help, based in Birmingham, where a large Muslim community of Pakistani and Indian origin exists. The chair of Ummah Help, Vakar Hazmi, also the chair of Remembering Srebrenica, is the son of a very important Islamic scholar based in Manchester, Maulana Azmi, and both father and son are outspoken critics of Islamic radicalism and in favor of integration in British society. Interesting, although this Mr. Azmi now claims otherwise, he has no history of past activism in terms of Bosnia. So this is from the official website, and what is in green, it's my highlight. And as you see, actually, you see that he frames it, the issue of the failure to protect Muslims in Europe in the same terms of the man that I described previous, Ed Hussein, who was a former radicalized Muslim who left radicalism and wrote a book. So he actually frames it the same way, that if they failed to protect the whites, what about us? So, let's see, okay. So, of course, behind the government's drive to promote this initiative, there was an array of converging factors. So there was also foreign policy factors, and I'll go back. Okay. So especially the involvement of William Hague and his interest, he had a particular interest in Bosnia, and in his term in office, the UK was much more involved, much more actively involved in Bosnian affairs. And he also became very interested in the issue of violence against civilians, and especially sexual violence, to such an extent that he abandoned his political career and now devotes himself, along with Angelina Jolie, only for this case. But what is interesting is that maybe he was the driving force behind this commemoration, but the money comes from the Home Office, through the Department of Communities and Local Government. And how this specific organization came is is not transparent. As I said, they had no past of activism, and in fact, they were commissioned by the government and subcontracted a public relation company at the beginning until they got to create a professionalized organization. They very much followed the template of another organization that was also sponsored by the government, the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust, but with two major differences. First difference is the Holocaust Memorial Trust is led mostly by people who have a strong connection with the Jewish community. Not necessarily that they are Jews, but most of them are. And also it is very clear that what kind of support they have from the scholar community, etc. But here you have no Bosnians involved or very, very marginally involved. Also previous activists are also not involved, and it is even not clear how they created their contents, etc. The second major difference between the focus on the Holocaust and remembering Srebrenica in Britain is that the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust does not shy away from engaging with other genocides after the Second World War, such as Cambodia, Rwanda, Bosnia, and Darfur. For each of these cases, the Trust has engaged with local activists and survivors from respective genocides who have actively participated in shaping the content of the activities and information materials. Remembering Srebrenica, on the contrary, was created with a vague purpose to promote better race relations in Great Britain, but without any strong connection to Bosnia. Okay, sorry. So you see, this is, they organize a lot of activities, also decentralized. This is major commemoration in Westminster Abbey, so you can see that this is actually very high profile because not everyone gets to Westminster Abbey. So just to finish, I'm going to focus on one specific event. So they organize a number of events, but what I'm finding very, very interesting is that they fly people to Bosnia for 3 days. Any British citizen can apply and just pay 50 pounds. They go to Bosnia to learn lessons about genocide, and then when they come back to Britain, they have to do something to give back. And so I went to this event called Silenced Voices already in March, in which a group of young people, some still students, other young professionals, went to Bosnia and visited Srebrenica in November. And then they did this event in London called Silenced Voices. And there is so already there is a problem here in calling it Silenced Voices, because the people who died were silenced, but the people who survived were not silenced. They have been active since 95, very, very active in the construction of memory, but also in the pursuit of justice. And so you have a young, group of people who go to Bosnia for 3 days, and then they come back and they claim to represent these people. So you see. So just to finish and without concluding, I'm going just to explain what's going on in this picture. So one of the elements of this event was the screening of a film that mixed horrible pictures of people dying or dead during the Bosnian War with footage that the participants created themselves. And so they went to the memorial in Potočari, in Srebrenica, and waiting for them were these two elderly women who belong to the organization Mothers of Srebrenica, and they were assigned to tell the participants their experience. So the man that is standing behind them is a man from Sarajevo, who is an employee of the organization Remembering Srebrenica. I draw your attention to the body language that is here, although this is just a picture. But So what happened is that one of the women, just see, Hatice Mehmedovic, which is the woman on the left to the man. She's a very experienced activist, and I know her, spoke to her before, and in this, she was speaking to the participants very, very mechanically. You know, like she was repeating what she says maybe every week. And then the elderly woman, she was extremely distressed. And so she stated the following. So for the second woman, the elderly woman, whom the participants felt she was like their own grandmother, she stated only that she had returned to, so she lives in Srebrenica, because she wanted to live where she had seen her loved ones for the last time. And then she said, I can't add anything further, because you are all like my children. But now, after I speak to people, I go home and I'm alone there, and for 3 days and 3 nights I cannot rest. Misled by the interpreter, but disregarding also the signs of discomfort both women displayed, the participants retained only that the elderly woman was saying that they, the participants, were now her children. And with this, I finish without concluding. I think that this is a case study that I will still develop. This is just the beginning. This is a side project from it's not part of my PhD, but it's something I'm very committed, and there's nothing to conclude at the moment because this is just very raw. But thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. And our last speaker will be Alina Thiemann.
I think I need to... Before I start, I have to say that this study is the result of both networking support and the short scientific mission grant offered by Cost Action in search of transcultural memory in Europe. And the paper of my colleague, Valentina Pricopie, and I deals with the politics of memory in the European Union, trying to understand, okay, let's see, yes, sorry. Trying to understand how memory travels from national to transnational level and then back again, which are, in this context, the agents for the uploading and downloading of projects of memory onto either the transnational or national scene. Does the involvement of mnemonic warriors in the first phase translate into activity in the second? We mainly focused on this second phase by looking at the commemoration of August 23rd, the European Day of Remembrance for victims of Stalinism and Nazism, in the Romanian context. So, August 23, remember, yeah? We chose this case, besides the personal connection to this particular cultural space, because we consider that it allows us to see how different layers of memory collide and how this phenomenon is affecting the European project of memory, which counts for both fascist and communist past. The proclamation of August 23 by the European Parliament as the European Day of Remembrance for victims of Stalinism and Nazism is the result of a long process pushed forward by actors from Central and Eastern Europe. It can be traced back to the 1980s, when migrants organized demonstrations on August 23 in different cities in the Western world. On August 23, 1989, the 50th anniversary of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, the citizens of the Baltic states organized the human chain known as the Baltic Way. And I wanted to point to this aspect because a new layer was added to the commemoration of the day, reminding about the treaty between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union.
August 23 means now for the Baltic states both the commemoration of an unfortunate event, but also the celebration of solidarity and resistance to the Soviet Union. I point to this aspect because in the Romanian case, August 23 also has different meanings, but which are not reinforcing each other. So fast forward to the European enlargement, which also brought constant requests from the new members for their particular past to be assumed at the European level. It has already been said. In 2008, the Prague Declaration calling for the condemnation of communist crimes was signed by important political actors. The same year, the European Parliament declared August 23 as a European Commemorative Day, reinforced through the 2009 resolution of the European Parliament on European conscience and totalitarianism. Since 2011, regional commemorative events were organized in different capital cities, starting with Warsaw, then Budapest, Vilnius, Riga, and last year Tallinn. We then focus on the Romanian case because of the multiple layers carried by August 23. Following the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, Romania lost in 1940 Basarabia, Northern Bukovina, and Herzegovina region. Therefore, one might expect that Romania has a high interest in commemorating this day and taking part in the transnational politics of memory, which aims to turn August 23 into a European lieu de mémoire. However, August 23rd is also the day when Romania switched sides in the Second World War in 1944 after a political maneuver of the king who managed to regain power by arresting the military dictator Ion Antonescu. This day also meant the beginning of communism in Romania under the occupation of the Red Army. August 23, 1944 is still a topic of heated debates up to present. As if this was not enough, August 23rd was also the National Day of Romania since 1948 until 1989. During Ceausescu's regime, the National Day was marked by impressive mass celebrations of the dictatorial couple. And since 2011, August 23 is the official commemorative day to remember the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. The later mnemonic layer was added at the sustained request of the civil society since 2008, following the Prague Declaration, which were addressed to the Romanian authorities to declare August 23 the day of commemoration for the victims of fascism and communism, and December 21st as the day of memory for the victims of communism in Romania. In Romanian language, to commemorate means to solemnly remember a sad moment, while memory points to a more personal act of commemoration, a more personal act of remembrance. The aim was clearly to differentiate between the reverential discursive distance of commemoration and memory as a personal, almost familial act. This also has an implication for the politics of memory. It points to the clear demarcation between European and national context. On the one hand, Romania is supposed to contribute to the construction of a common European memory by commemorating all the victims of two totalitarian regimes, but on the other hand, Romania specifically remembers its own victims, and particularly the victims of communism. It was only in 2011 that the government decided to declare both August 23rd and December 21st as commemorative days in Romania. After the law was adopted in November 2011, we rather observe a remarkable silence regarding the European and Romanian commemoration of August 23rd. Also, the law stipulates that official commemorative events need to be organized on this day. To our knowledge, only two such events were commemorating August 23rd, 1939. A public debate with historians organized in Bucharest by the Institute for the Investigation of the Communist Crimes, organized in 2012, and the books exhibition organized in a public library in Suceava in 2013. Suceava is a city in the Romanian part of Bukovina. In our analysis, we look at news media and political discourses because we consider that political actors and institutions, as well as journalists, are powerful actors in shaping collective memory. The analysis of 3 national newspapers since 2011 until 2015 for 1 week in August reveals exactly the opposite of what the initiators of the commemorative law expected. They said, "We do not believe that the coincidence with the National Day of Romania celebrating during communism, which referred to the act on August 23, 1944, would create confusion 20 years after the fall of communism." Well, on the contrary, our analysis shows that the main topic for journalists was still August 23, 1944, and its entangled consequences. Almost half of the articles related to August 23 were about 1944. Sorry. The next important dimension of this day, as revealed by the analyzed publication, was its celebration as a national day during communism, which also allowed for communist nostalgia to be expressed. August 23, 1939, as a significant moment for Romania, was rarely mentioned, with no reference to the recent national legislation. Only 5 news media articles over 5 years refer to August 23 as a European commemorative day, and 3 of them were actually translations of opinion texts signed by Viviane Reding, at that time Vice President of the European Commission and Commissioner responsible for justice, fundamental rights and citizenship. The main problem was that these texts, signed by a European actor, were not put in context, and any other information regarding the commemorative dimension of August 23 in Romania was missing. This was leading also to the confusing situation in 2013 when Viviane Reding wrote a text clearly addressed to the Baltic States audience. Her reference to the Baltic States without nominalizing any other country makes no sense for the Romanian audience in the absence of any explanation offered by the Romanian journalists. The other 2 references to August 23 as in a European context were made in 2015 after the official commemoration in Tallinn. They included an editorial signed by Radu Preda, the director of the Institute for the Investigation of Communist Crimes and the Memory of Romanian Exile, which was in fact the translation of the Tallinn joint statement with a very short introduction. And I will quote, "Few days ago, on August 23 in Tallinn, the ministers of justice from several European countries answered to the invitation of their Estonian counterpart to reunite in order to mark the day of commemoration for the victims of fascism and communism. The meeting allowed the formulation of a common declaration which interests us, and I reproduce below. 2 aspects need to be mentioned here. First, his ambiguous comment, which interests us, and us, the Romanians, us, the Institute, and why this should be of interest for us. No explanation is offered. Second, he refers to the European commemoration in Tallinn using the terminology of the Romanian legislation, which adds another element of confusion. The other reference, also about the commemorative event in Tallinn, was made within an interview, also with Radu Preda, published in a different newspaper, and focusing on the 2015 amended law banning the use of fascist symbols in Romania. Preda was basically criticizing the Romanian authorities for treating fascism and communism in Romania in a different way, in contrast to the current regional politics of memory. While these are the references to the official commemorative dimension of August 23 in the analyzed newspaper, still we couldn't ignore, even the journalists decided not to cover the 2 political statements of Klaus Johannis in 2014 and 2015. One was done, these statements were exactly about the importance to commemorate August 23 in the Romanian context. The first one was done in 2014 when he was the leader of the National Liberal Party, and the next one, which is basically the same message, was last year when he was already the president of Romania, and transmitting the same message probably had the hope that if he says the same thing again and again, people will hear him, for instance, journalists from the newspapers. The core values So in 2015, the message of the president, which was on a Sunday, was redistributed by some news agencies and some televisions. The core values promoted by the national actor Klaus Johannis were democracy and the rule of law in order to contextualize his statements. He refers to the commemoration of the day of August 23 according to the national legislation, which added no reference to the European Day of Remembrance. The past and the present European references remain, however, central in his message. The commemorated victims were European, and the condemnation of all totalitarian regimes spread within Europe is presented as a guarantee for the democratic European future of Romania. The presidential message also focuses on the identity dimension and represents a form of action presented as a framework for a strategic plan of commemoration in terms of memory politics. And I'm quoting, "The act of remembering is not a simple symbolic declaration, but the conviction that this way will bring us even closer and will make us reflect on the senses of memory, on the role of our trust in institutions, and on the importance of civil rights for a nation." The media coverage, as I said, by several news agencies, of Johannis' statement is revealing the significance of the day for the national public perception. However, a certain hierarchy of historical significance is discursively built by the journalist, so that references resist to the emergent politics of memory on August 23 in Romania. With few exceptions, the journalists refer first to 1944 and only then to 1939. Moreover, the journalistic focus is more oriented on a kind of restoration of the past, where memory is stronger than history. Okay, concluding, confusion on the official significance of the day at the European and national level generates a passive attitude of Romanian journalists in covering the commemorative event. This is also caused by the lack of political actions following the proclamation of August 23 as a commemorative day. We could nevertheless argue that turning August 23, 1939 in a lieu de mémoire is still in an incipient phase, so that the phenomenon should be followed. And I expect that in Romania, with the return of the political right to power, we will observe more activities in this sense, so that it will be one of the times, as was referred before, when the political discourse on a common past and a common future will also be extended to Romania. Anyway, I think that it would be interesting to correlate this with studies in other countries, as I mentioned, also Baltic states, but not only countries of the European Union. Of course, I have in mind right now Moldova, where there are no overlapping layers for August 23, and that day represents for the Republic, for the Romanians in the Republic of Moldova, the day when their country was separated from Romania. And as we notice until now, it's commemorated every year with reference to the European Union. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And now I would like to ask Professor Jeffrey Olick for comments on these three presentations.
Okay, thank you for these very interesting and inspiring papers. I did not actually have all of the papers ahead of time, so I'm reacting, and some people did different things in their oral presentation versus the written, so I'm just going to react to what we've all heard here today, rather than to the manuscripts. If I were to look for a theme that brings these all together, it's the theme of ambiguity and complexity. I think all three of these papers highlight in great detail. Think about the metaphor of traveling memory. You think about all the different ways that we travel. We walk and we drive a car and we fly planes and we take trains and buses. And sometimes they go, there's a one-way street, so you have to go away around the back. The routes that memory travels are incredibly complex and unpredictable. And I think that's a point that's been brought out in each of these papers. But I wouldn't be worth my plane ticket if I didn't have a few questions or comments, and how strange it is to have Aline and Alina on the same panel, with the confusion that's likely to cause. So the first speaker, I will say, instead of using her name. I think this was a fascinating and important paper. And makes an important contribution in its analysis of the European Union, the European Parliament in particular, as an agent of memory, and looking at this kind of memory entrepreneurship. The one place where I disagree or would urge more caution is in the assumption or implication, whether it's your assumption or Europe's assumption, that national memory strives for uniformity. Even if you think about a single political party or political leader or government agency at a particular point in time, what I found in my research actually is that if you follow a particular political speaker around for a week, and by follow I don't mean literally, but you just read everything or listen to everything that they say, and they can move from context to context and from audience to audience, and what they say at 9 o'clock in the morning to a domestic audience can be radically different from what they say at 12 o'clock to an international audience. What they say to one group, the group of victims, is very different than what they say to the group of perpetrators, and so sometimes it leads one to think that they're incredibly cynical and just telling people what they want to hear, but I think it's actually much more complex than that. And if we look at the transcript, both literal and figurative, of national memory, or memory, official memory in the nation state, what we find again is tons and tons of ambiguity and complexity. And so I think that the difference between the European public sphere and the national public spheres that it addresses is not a matter of the amount or degree of complexity, but of the contents of the struggles that go on in those different forms. The agents, the audiences are constituted differently in the European field than they are in the national fields, but I wouldn't expect it to be a greater or lesser degree of complexity. Political leaders have to reconcile, especially in pluralistic societies, have to reconcile a wide variety of interest groups and audiences. Lots more to say, but I want to keep it short. Sarah, your paper is a great, it reminds me of a controversy that's going on American colleges and universities these days. It starts out in silliness, as these things usually do, but comes to a perhaps more interesting point. There was a protest at a college in the United States, an elite liberal arts college, Oberlin, where a group of students were protesting against the dining facilities because they had these ethnic food options, or ethnic food. Tonight is Mexican night, or tomorrow is Italian night, and the food that they were serving and calling Mexican food or Italian food or Chinese food was completely inauthentic. It was mass manufactured, had nothing to do with the way that people in these countries or from these countries eat. And so groups of students protested that this was a damaging, stereotyped cultural appropriation. Now, if you're going to protest that the taco that the dining hall produced is not authentic, that's silly enough, and we shouldn't waste time on it. But it led to a larger debate about cultural appropriation and the complexities and the problems. Another example is a satirical TV show that years ago, also with Mexican food, had a bunch of people who would be speaking with a normal American accent, but whenever they would mention something ethnic or a word that came from Spanish, they would overemphasize the Spanish interpretation. What would you like for lunch? Oh, I think I'll have a burrito, right? You know, and that there's something strange. So your case reminded me in some sense of the strange complexities and ambiguities, again, of cultural appropriation. To whom does Srebrenica belong? And who's entitled to commemorate it, and in which purpose? Is there such thing as a misappropriation of a memory for a purpose in a different context? So the question goes to the notion of authenticity. Who owns memory? I mean, the same can be said about, we've heard it mentioned, the 2000 Stockholm discussion about Holocaust commemoration. Well, one of the reactions to that is that all sorts of countries that had very good or relatively good records during the Second World War were rushing to atone for their sins that they hadn't actually committed. So the bandwagon effect works in all sorts of directions. If I were to ask a critical question, it would stem from the fact that you referred to this as a case study. And so that raises the question, a case study of what? So I'd like to, I mean, I've got my ideas. I'm viewing it as a case study of traveling memory and of cultural appropriation. And but I'd like to hear a little bit more about what it is a case of. The question, of course, when sometimes we say it's a case study, we mean that we're treating this as a unique, incomparable situation that really doesn't match up. In others, we're asking, well, we've got 50 things that are an example of this and 50 things that are an example of that. So there's always that dialectic between reference and comparability. Alina, great paper, very complex. Also, I'm just free associating. I remember a debate or reading something very shortly after 1989 where I think it was Peter Reichel, the German historian, cultural analyst, commented on the fact that isn't it strange that the Berlin Wall fell on November 9th, which was a pretty loaded date for German history, not simply Kristallnacht, but also the Munich Putsch of 1923. And he referred to this as the grace of the calendar. But I would add to that, there's the grace of the calendar, there's also the disgrace of the calendar. Of course, if we add up all of the different kinds of events that are getting commemorated, we've only got 365 dates. And a few of them, like December 25th and January 1st, are pretty well occupied. With all of the things that we're going to commemorate, the chances that we're not going to land on a date that's already important to somebody for something else is rather small. But what's interesting about that is even when you have the grace or the disgrace or the randomness of the calendar, the very fact that it's landed on something that's already occupied creates strange kinds of resonances, which leads me to the observation, I'm sure it's fairly obvious to everyone, just that national calendars have a geology to them, or an archaeology that requires a particular kind of analysis. I'm also reminded of a chapter of a book I edited years ago called States of Memory. The chapter was by my sociology colleague Eviatar Zerubbabel, and one of the things he did is he took all of the nations currently members of the United Nations at the time he wrote the article and made a list of all of the dates of their national holidays. So it wasn't just July 4th, but July 4th, 1776. And he created what he called a commemogram. Which year, first of all, there are certain years and certain centuries even. So the 13th century is very big for European commemoration in the world, but the 16th century much less so if you make a cross for every commemoration. So this reminded me of that memory is a minefield. It's either a grace or a disgrace of the calendar, but also that commemoration is always taking place not only in a field of memory, but in a minefield of memory. And I think this is a great example of that. So those are just some random thoughts that I had listening to these papers, all of which I think are very much worth reading. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And maybe we can collect questions and yes, comments, and then we will back to ours.
Okay, my question is to Alina. So it's a very, very specific question. I mean, the perpetrating system or regimes, the description of perpetrators, have been constantly changing. I mean, in the Prague Declaration, it was victims by Stalinism and Nazism, right? In the Warsaw Commemoration Day, it was victims by totalitarian and authoritarian regimes. And the next, victims by totalitarian regimes, and next, victims by fascism and communism. Might be a small change, but might be a very big change. Because if one begin to use the term of totalitarianism, I think inevitably this term has a certain Eurocentric connotation. But just want to just put the Stalinism and Nazism in parallel, it's just, two different victims by two different regimes. But fascism and communism is also can include fascism. Italians were victims by fascism, or especially Yugoslavians, and also communism, Chinese, right? So I think that this slight change of these the perpetrating institutions or regimes might have some connotations and political certain, how can I say, assumptions. And also, I guess there must be quite a certain debate in every year when they host this commemoration day under the slightly different title. So can you just explain if there were any certain political debates about the changing the title, and also how do you interpret this change, by yourself?
So this question is to, I guess, Aline and Alina, both. But I'm trying to think about independent and dependent variables here, which is something that you mentioned actually yesterday, Aline. And I'm thinking about, I wanted to ask you, in your estimation, what are the motivating factors behind this sort of uptick in European historical memory policy making? Why are European authorities doing this? And then how successful are they? If there is a clear single goal or objective, can we measure how successful they've been in the last 10, 20 years? And then I guess I want to ask a little bit about identity as well. So if we can think about, when we think about national memories, we always think of them as creating some sort of national identity. And I'm wondering if the sort of transnational region of memory in the European case, if you see it creating some sort of, or strengthening some sort of transnational European identity. Thank you.
Thank you. This follows on the last point about transnational European identity. Sometimes it's really interesting the way papers work together on these panels. And I found myself reading Aline's paper through Sarah's. Something troubles me about the notion of European identity. And I think it particularly troubles me because of the period in which we're now living, in which many European states are building very large fences to keep out non-Europeans, and in which the basis upon which those fences are being put up are claims to precisely the difference of Europe, be it white, be it Christian, whatever it may be, as against the people that are trying to get here. And to remind us of the point where we're actually at now, even those politicians who've taken moderate positions towards refugees, notably Angela Merkel, appear to be wanting to sign up to a deal whereby all refugees are sent back to Turkey without being processed, right, in exchange for refugees then being brought in from Turkey who have been processed. I would want to suggest, I'd like your comments on that, but I'd like to suggest in this context that possibly one way in which Sarah's paper might be seen as a case study, to come to Jeffrey's remark, is that it may very well be a case study of the limits of European identity.
Maybe we should let some answers.
Okay, so I start. I start with the comment on uniformity, if national states actually strive for uniformity. I don't deny the complexity, of course, of national narratives, but I think we can generally say that nation states have tried to come up with some kind of a narrative that reinforces identity. And you can see this over time. It changes, of course, depending on the social and political context and the social and political needs as well of the time. But I think there is at least the attempt to come up with something that is fairly uniform, that people can identify with, and they do that by selecting what is being remembered and what's being forgotten. So of course this is a bit of a simplification, if you so want. But what I really wanted to get at is showing that there is a difference with the European attempts to integrate all these different narratives, so that it's not what is often being accused of trying to harmonize it into some kind of a simplified European narrative of our common heritage. What would be really interesting to see now is what's happening in September 2016 when the House of European History is going to be opened in Brussels, because one of the big criticisms of this particular project, and I didn't mention it in the paper, is that it's precisely trying to do that, to somehow simplify the differences and not talk about where the different nations have had different experiences. Now, the motivating factors for the European Union is exactly that, creating some kind of identity narrative. So it's very closely connected to the whole identity issue, and it has always been that way. Huh? If you look at what happened in the 1970s, when they suddenly discovered culture as being a special glue or potential glue, this was very much a question of identity. And we all know that memory and identity are so closely connected that it's almost impossible to detangle them. So I think it's very much stemming out of this idea of trying to find something that binds people together. How successful is it? That is a good question indeed. One of my bigger projects that I'd like to start in the next years is really to test out what's actually happening. Obviously the European Union is doing evaluations of their own programs, and they see of what is actually happening on the ground. Where does the money go that they give? Because that's mainly what they're doing. I mean, the biggest influence they have is by these financial tools that they hand out to the grassroots level. I think that's the particularly interesting thing here, that they're trying to foster participation, civil society participation, and they're not targeting the national level. So what you have here is some kind of a jumping over the national level, going from the local directly to the supranational, if you so want. Yes, the exclusiveness of this, I totally see where you're coming from, and I think that might be, that's not a new issue in a way. I think nation states have always defined themselves against the other, and the European Union in a certain sense is doing the same thing at the moment. And I think we would all agree that this is maybe something that is not wanted, that's detrimental. I'm not quite sure if I can comment on the refugee crisis at the moment, because I think this is maybe going a little bit into a different direction. But what we can clearly see here is that maybe the idea that Europe has been built on a certain set of common values has been put into question by the refugee crisis.
Thank you so much for the comments. Going straight to the question of case study of what? Well, to be very honest, I'm still a bit all over the place, as I'm sure you noticed. But to be a case study, essentially, of the limits of instrumentalization of memory. This is something that I'm very interested of, how these top-down initiatives then gain a dynamic of its own, and that, you know, as action has consequences. And I can see, although I still have a lot of work to do, that we already have intended and unintended consequences of these commemorative acts. Some of these actually, you know, travel back to Bosnia and may also have consequences there. So, such as, for instance, these people are going to Srebrenica. What kind of impact will it have in interacting relations in this town in particular? So, it's very much my interest to explore the dynamics of memory and expose the limits of a top-down approach. Regarding the question of transnational memory and transnational identity, I'm just taking the question. I can see, so I'm particularly interested for this case of the transnationalization of the memory of Srebrenica. That's from the day of the event that starts, because this was an international event. And that somehow we can say that it is creating an array of transnational identities that can be ideological, religious, but not necessarily, you know, we have this initiative of the European Union, but it does not follow that the transnational element of European identity is coming. There are other transnational identities that are being influenced in this, you know, game of mutual implication, that are not the one that maybe European members of parliament intended. And also it would be interesting to see, I actually know a bit about the case, like that each of these cases has particular initiatives with particular persons, particular members of parliament. To finish the issue of who memory belongs and appropriation, this was really difficult for me to write this because I was constantly sounding to myself very judgmental, and especially maybe very judgmental of these people who went for 3 days, until I realized that detail that the translator is somehow misleading them, that they are really reacting on what they are being given. Doesn't mean that the same people, you know, if they read a few books, etc., will not have a more nuanced approach. But I think that yesterday we had this issue of the document of ethics, you know, conduct of ethics about memorialization initiatives. And I think this is actually really, really important, because I could see in this particular case many ethical issues about how to use victims, survivors, statements. So I think that the memory doesn't belong to anyone. It's you know, a creature that escapes from creators, but that it is always connected with lived experience of someone, especially if you're speaking of difficult memories of mass murder. And I think that the ethical dimension needs to be very, very carefully dealt with, and I think that everyone should have some kind of even moral duty to point at the things that we are not comfortable with. So, just to finish.
Okay, I will start by answering first the question about, first with the identity and how successful were these projects. I think in my paper I'm trying to show that it's not enough to adopt a resolution or a law, because it will remain dead letters. And you just check, it's an official way to mark a particular day, but to be successful, if you want, it depends on the interest, yeah. So I think, and you can check this by going to the people. I was just going to another level, media. So in my case with August 23 in Romania shows that it's a lot of confusion in journalism. So the next level will be to talk with the people to see what do they remember exactly about August 23, what it means for them. Okay, so the question about terminology, actually I have a section and I try to develop this in the paper because I think it's very important. So, as Aline also said the first day and today, and it was a lot of resistance from the Western counterparts in the European Union at the request of actors from Central and Eastern Europe. I know that there are many terms to refer to different regions in the other side of the world. I was also had a paper in your panel like years ago exactly about the parliamentarian debates, and it was the discussion on communism, to use the word communism, for instance, which makes sense because for Greece, for Spain, for other countries, it's a totally different experience. So then finding the August 23, 1939, as the day of the pact between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, it's Stalinism and Nazism. I was interested then how is this, so this was adopted like this in 2008 by the European Parliament, and then in the 2009 resolution is called like the European-wide Day of Remembrance of Victims of Totalitarianisms. And I was interested how is it reincorporated back to the national level after it's going up to on the European stage, and in the case of Romania, it turned into fascism and communism because to adjust it to the national context, because if you say Stalinism would be only the first stage of a traumatic experience, at least what is presented, how it's presented in the politics of memory, and you exclude the other time. So communism then refers to the time after the Second World War until '89. And fascism, because we had legionaries in Romania, so they were called fascists, and so basically you turn the European resolution and the terminology there, you reincorporating in the national context, because before the European resolution we didn't have a law saying that August 23 is commemorated in Romania. Yeah. And it's interesting to look at the other countries how this terminology changed. And of course it matters because the question is which victims do you commemorate? The whole regimes, like the European level, or only national level?
And in this Romanian case means that the victims by the Romanian fascism, right?
It's fascism and communism, so you can refer to, yes, the fascism is used exactly for the Romanian context, but I still have to look because my assumption is that there will be changes in the next years regarding this day, and especially related to the regional politics of memory and how Romania wants to play here. But it's also have a day of Holocaust in Romania, and we have, as I said, the day of victims of communism in Romania. So you already, and for instance, for December 21st, you have commemorations, real commemorations every year. And you had before, you had the law, and also through the law. So, yeah.
I think we have some more.
So that's my questions for Sarah, and it's quite refreshing actually to hear a paper which has no conclusion. Believe me, it's quite refreshing for me. I hate conclusions. So can you tell me if you have heard any kind of reaction or you have seen a reaction from Bosnian Muslims who live in United Kingdom against such commemoration? Because in 2015, actually, the commemoration in Srebrenica became a riot, and how people chased the Serbian MP outside and all this story which created. And my second question is that how do you deal or treat this notion of ummah, because to paraphrase basically Edward Said, it's basically most non-Muslims or most Orientalist kind of academics, they take it and they use it as if every Muslim becomes a ummah and become a homogeneous group. And the broadery which you use is a particular notion which is used by the Southeast Asian Muslims in United Kingdom. So the European Muslims or the East European Muslims, they're quite actually, they stay outside this broadery. So I like to know, how do you rework it or how do you treat it in your work?
Thank you. I'm not convinced by your Aline argument that actually, as I understood it, that there is a European memory possible. I think that at some point European Union, I don't know, at the bureaucracy level, policy level, etc., just changed their rhetoric, yes? When it appeared that actually European memory is not possible, then they actually appropriated the language of the limits of a European memory. And that's why it's just changed in the context, in the content towards dialogue that is needed, exchange, change of perspectives. This is what we know from Aleida Assmann and all the scholarship about European memory, but it's still functioning in the way of grants, projects that are sponsored from above, yes, by the European Union. So there is something inauthentic that you can actually, and I'm glad that you're nodding because I understand your project actually as a negation of what was said here. Even if we speak of this, I don't know, fluidity, exchange, ambiguity, it's still coming from above. And you presented a response within a nation, not national, but responses within a nation to this policy from above. Also, you said a while ago that the EU doesn't target a nation, it actually is targeting a nation, deliberately omitting it, right? Could you reflect on that too? So there are no national projects that are promoted, but actually it is anti-national. Would you agree with that? There are also projects that are competitions for projects to deal with regional memories. So regions which are conceptualized as transgressing nations, researching borderlands. We could understand it as a policy of memory that is going against national memories. And I like very much this line, this interpretation that appeared here about the limits and the ethics of memory that is involved in all of that. As Jeffrey said, yes, it is appropriation. And there are also interesting economic and political aspects behind that. So those people who pays for those tickets, for people who travel there, and the guy who was standing behind those two women, he probably gets paid too. Do these women get paid? No. So they are used in a multiple sense, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
More or less.
Okay, thank you.
One more question.
I would have a question to Sara Correia. We are awaiting the result of very important referendum in UK. How this result, whatever it will be, will influence the government-sponsored struggle, where it may fluctuate.
Not to omit any question, I will ask you for answer, and the next part of questions later. Okay?
Could you answer? Yes. Of course it's coming from above, but not only. I mean, this is the whole idea behind it, that it's financed from above, but it's supposed to activate people from below. So, I mean, we could discuss now if it makes any difference, if it's been financed from above. But I think what we really have to look at is what's actually happening on the ground. In that context, I would agree that maybe the EU has changed its rhetoric. If you look at what happened since the 1970s, really, there's an increasing focus on intercultural dialogue. So this has become a little bit the riding horse of the European Union, and I think the initiatives that are being financed through the Europe for Citizens program falls very much into this category. If it's anti-national, yes, I think so. I mean, they're not interested in anything that is coming from the nation state. They're interested in projects that are being put forward by NGOs, by museums, by little associations, for example, and they're particularly interested in trans-border projects. So to be able to apply, you always have to have partners from different countries, and they particularly foster projects that are taking place in border regions for very obvious reasons. And I think this falls into another category of EU policies, which is perceiving Europe as Europe of the regions more than Europe of the nation states. This is a policy that you can also see in other areas. It's not only contingent to memory politics, but it's something that the EU has been fostering for some time now by paying particular attention to minorities, for example, and for regions that are particularly vulnerable.
First of all, so the reaction of Bosnian Muslims who live in the UK, of course it varies. Mostly it bypasses them, mostly. Although I have to say that this organization is now at this stage because they're already, in cruise speed, that they are trying to bring some Bosnian Muslims into the organization as to fill the gap. So for most people probably don't even know that this exists because it was really, Birmingham, where it's the headquarters, actually has very big Bosnian Muslim community, but only now that Remembering Srebrenica started. Actually, they did not reach them, but the Bosnians came to speak to them. But specifically, let me give you just two examples that I know. One is an activist who has his own NGO called Bridges of Peace, and he's a Bosniak, a Bosnian Muslim, and he does his charity work in Bosnia, but also with people from Britain. And he is very actively engaged with the Holocaust Memorial Day Trust. But he may attend some of the events of this organization, but he doesn't get involved. He doesn't. They also don't try to get him involved much. But another case that was very interesting, when I went to this student event, I was with a friend, a fellow researcher who happens to be herself from Bosnia, and I have to say she was absolutely furious. She could hardly contain herself, and in the end they had some kind of tree where you could put a message, like as if it was a leaf, and the message that she put was, you should be ashamed of yourselves, you should be giving this money to support students in Bosnia, and just dissolve yourselves. And as a British citizen, which she is now, I very strongly oppose this. So, because of specifically not only the issue of appropriation, but because this event freezes Srebrenica in the past, but in a moment in the past in which there was no life before the massacre, there was no life in peacetime, and there was no life during the siege. There's just a massacre, and there is no afterwards. And that's what she very strongly objects. But of course, she's not representative. But just to show you that there is a variety of reactions, also from from a few activists back in Bosnia. So one of the most prominent activists about Srebrenica also told me he wanted distance from them, and that he told the leader of this project himself that he doesn't, that he has his own, like I have my agenda and you have yours. And this leads me to the issue of ethics of memory. Okay, regarding these women, I don't want also, I mean, the visitors, the students, they saw them as agentless victims, so I don't want to reproduce that. So they had to perform that role, but that's not what they are, actually. They are activists who, since the massacre happened, these women very, very strongly fought to have the truth uncovered. They also fought to have a memorial in Srebrenica. And they, for a long time, have accepted, but with pain, to expose their stories and reach out so that their main goal of achieving justice would be fulfilled. But now we are in the situation that on a large scale, that justice has been achieved, and next week we will have the sentence of Radovan Karadzic, and it's very likely that he will also be condemned of genocide. And of course, but there is also something else in this case, which is that you have cultural codes. So it's a very Bosnian thing, and within Bosnia it's a very Bosniak or Bosnian Muslim thing. They don't feel that they are free to refuse, almost, and people can be very pushy in terms of using them. So for a long time they accepted to expose themselves because they thought that there was a reason for that, but sometimes this goes beyond what is reasonable, because just because you're willing to give me something, I don't have the right to ask you for everything. So okay, question of UMA is extremely important, because even so, the parent organization is even called UMA Help, as I said. But obviously, what is at stage here is very much British Muslims struggling, and especially with the change of generations, and as they get liberated also from these patronage networks, to find their own place as British. And they mobilize their Muslim identities, mobilized actually more against their ethnic background and as a bridge to their British identity. Also the Black British had a bit that struggle. And so actually also the idea of UMA is evoked, but actually applied much more differently. This case is interesting in the sense that so more radical elements, and I use radical here in kind of neutral term, not as government term, as radical means terrorist, that in their case, they actually will have this kind of more European identity in terms of looking at Bosnian Muslims, Albanian Muslims as members of the same community. But the mainstream conservatives, no. Okay, just referendum. I don't think it will change much, because the big problem is the issue of radicalization, and it's, I think, quite clear that the government doesn't know what to do about it. And that has not, although they used the European Union for creating this event, but that actually, they are very much with the back turn. Actually, they didn't even ask the EU for money for this, so, okay.
Thank you all for this wonderful panel, which has really brought back the whole issue of Europe. And you mentioned, Alina, that there's the issue of the dominant narrative in Europe, but there is one, and that is in a sense about reconciliation between old enemies, right? That has been the one that was brought out at the awarding of the Nobel Prize. It's the idea that Europe used to be fighting with each other, and now we're capable of becoming friends again. So I'm interested in, but it seems to me the real problem is not so much reconciliation between old enemies, but creating new alliances with people who are not historically connected to each other. So how do you get Britain supporting solidarity with Greece, and how do you get Spain and Poland linked together, because they haven't been traditionally fighting each other. So I'm interested in that regard to hear about how you estimate the success of the European policies in terms of actually bringing any type of new sort of connections into play, because it sounds as if they have been more a repetition of old sort of partisanships. If you think of for the victims of communism and fascism, but I presume Spain is not really in on this, is probably not commemorating that particular day. So I'm interested in this sort of a la carte opt-out, in the opt-out sort of clauses that the nations seem to be applying, that there can be a European day of commemoration for the victims of fascism, but probably not celebrated or commemorated in Spain. Srebrenica is not commemorated in Holland, even though it's, I think, an extremely important site of memory, a very troubling site of memory, but it's not commemorated officially in Holland, if I'm right. So I'm interested in seeing if there's any in that range of days which have been designated as official days. Do you see a pattern in the opting in, opting out of the commemoration? And if at the level of these new sort of grassroots initiative, you talked about cross-national projects, are there projects which are unexpected in terms of the alliances they are bringing into play, or is it more predictable historical connections between neighbours in a geographical sense?
I will join the calls for a more critical approach and have a question to the first speaker. Two short questions. First one is, what is the source of the competence of certain EU institutions that are, as you said, creating the region of memory in EU? You don't find creating region of memory in the Treaty on Functioning European Union. So how is it legally labeled by those institutions? How those actions are labeled? And the second thing. Shouldn't we maybe leave the terms that sound nice and are suitable for appearing in official documents, like supporting the preservance of common heritage and transnational dialogue, and try to decode how this politics of memory, the industry of European memory, is working, who is choosing what elements should it consist of, why those elements, and what is the result that those group of people or organizations, organizations are linked to groups of people. What are the results they try to achieve? As you said, it stands against the some national policies, as far as I understood. So why doing it? So what they are trying to achieve? Thank you.
I'm also a bit skeptic about this vision of European Union memory, because actually almost all this discussion is about difficult past. Every single European, but not only country, has its own difficult past, which is combined by many very unique factors. And by overcoming the borders of national politics of memory and so on, does it mean we want to share with our other countries this difficult past? And it's kind of I'm not sure, do I want to base on a combination of so many difficult pasts as a fundament of European Union, on European memory? And I'm a bit skeptic, because also, of course, we can say that another way is to find some, let's say, positive memories. However, even experiences like reintegration Europe after Soviet Union collapse. We even cannot agree about commemoration of this experience, because like Kubik and Bernhardt research project 25 years after communism proved this important, I would say this important event, it's not commemorated in every country. For example, for some part of Europe, the important day was 1989, and for the rest of Europe, it was, for example, 1991. So even we cannot find, we cannot agree about some positive things. So what about all this difficulties? Thank you.
One more question to Aline, a comment perhaps, but more from the conceptual levels and the content of the EU policies and politics. Well, I'm still not convinced by your distinction between EU policies and national policies, and again, going back to what Jeff said of treating nations like homogeneous actors. I do understand also your answer, and I have heard it, that okay, we can treat them at least for a moment like that, but they're not, because they are deeply divided also along the EU factors. So, well, right now we are in the country in which the government takes away the EU flags, and the demonstrations on the streets bring the EU flags. So, well, there is this issue of partisanship over the, let's say, not only policies, but let's say values which the people connect with the EU, and it's very difficult to grasp when you just divide between EU and nation states as separate entities.
Any more questions? Oh God, okay, that's a lot of questions. Let's see if I remember everything. So the question if new connections are being made between different histories, and what the role of Spain, for example, is. Indeed, this is very interesting if we look at the debates that preceded the 2009 resolution on the 23rd of August. So Alina's paper is very well speaking to this, because the southern European countries were a problem in a way, because like initially this resolution was only about fascism and Stalinism, for example, and then they decided, okay, maybe this is for all totalitarian regimes. So that would also include the Spanish experiences, the Greek experience, and the Portuguese experiences. So even though most people don't notice it when they read the resolution, and they assume this is only about probably only about Eastern Europe, really, because it's referring with the 23rd of August to date that was particularly important to Central and Eastern Europe. The idea is really that it's all-encompassing, and it's all-encompassing all experience of totalitarianism. Now, we all know that this is a bit of a complicated perception, because the old totalitarianism debate of can you compare it, what is part of it, as the Spanish fascism, can we actually call the experiences in Spain fascism, was it something else? It's probably leveling a little bit too much, I suspect. However, what the EU is trying to do is move on a meta level with this. So it's not necessarily about the individual histories anymore. What it's at least trying to do is move beyond that by saying there are certain dynamics that have been common to all countries and certain experiences that have been common to all countries. What does that mean for us today? And this is also one of the reasons, if you look into detail in which kind of projects are being funded, they're the ones that are targeting the educational field a lot. So it's this old idea of learning from history. And I think this explains a lot also when it comes to one of the speakers asking, do we want to share the different pasts, the difficult pasts with everyone? Because it's not necessarily anymore about sharing difficult pasts or denying that there have been different pasts in the different countries, but it's really moving beyond this to a level where we can talk about values that sprung out of this. Yes, what have we learned? What does it mean for our society today? So that's why this arena is created, the arena where exchange takes place. Exchange between different actors, between different groups in society, between different histories, between different experiences. Acknowledging really the differences more than trying to uniformize them or to make them uniform. In terms of unexpected alliances in the projects, yes, there are unexpected alliances. Obviously, it's very difficult for me to tell if they are there because it's easier to get the money that way. I'm not quite sure. I think this might play a role sometimes. But what you can clearly see is that there's, if you look over time, what kind of partners get together, there's more and more people from Eastern and Western Europe who get together. So it's not the expected alliances between, let's say, the Netherlands and Germany and Belgium, for example, or the southern European countries. But you see increasingly alliances being formed between countries that on the surface don't seem to share that much.
Because this is a requirement from the European Union to include Eastern Europe in order to get money.
Yeah, of course, that's why I was saying, like, it can very well be that this also has to do with very functional considerations, of course. Now, the source of competence by the European institutions, of course, we all know the EU does not have any legal competence in this. They can only pass resolutions, the European Parliament at least, and it can finance projects. These are the only kind of tools they have. There's no legal competence in the sense of making things a requirement. I don't think this is going to change, of course, for very good reasons. It's all about symbolic politics, really. Who chooses what is being included and what is being excluded? Again, there it's very interesting to look at the debates and see who is particularly active and who is deciding for what. That tells you a lot, I think, because if you only look at the resolutions, these are the final products, and they do not tell you anything. It's carefully drafted documents that are, very uninteresting, if you so want. Where you get at the gist of everything is when you look at parliamentary debates, and particularly when you look at everything that is happening before the plenary debates, for example. So which kind of parliamentary groups get together? How do people vote? Because that's the other thing. You might have a debate beforehand that tells you something, but then how people vote might be something completely different. So what I noticed, and it's interesting again in the context of the August 23rd, is that when it came to the whole debate of the equivalence between the different regimes, you could clearly see that you did not only have an East-West divide, something that you would maybe expect. You did not only have a divide between old countries and new member states, but you had very much also divisions of ideology, and you had divisions within the party groups. So if you looked at how people voted, the Greek parliamentarians, they voted all in a different direction than their respective parliamentary groups, and this had to do with a very specific role that the Greek communists had in the Civil War. So if you look at it, it's much more complex in a way. That's what I wanted to say, than it seems maybe to be on the surface. Positive memories. Actually, 1.5 years ago, I gave a paper here about 1989 and why 1989 has not really turned into some kind of a European Year de Mémoire, and why there's so much more focus on the 23rd of August of 1939, for example. So that's an interesting question. It's a bit of a puzzle as well, huh? Because you would expect the EU jumping on this possibility of creating something positive that everybody can share somehow. Now, I'm not going to explain, this would be another presentation, why this has not turned into a lieu de mémoire. But I think if you look deeper into this, it tells you a lot about the dynamics that are at play on the European Union level and certain decisions that are being taken. Okay, the thing about the national narratives of being not uniform, maybe I have to rethink this. I mean, I got the criticism twice now. I still think there's something to it, but maybe I should qualify this a little bit better when I'm presenting it, at least.
Thank you very much. I think we have a lot to talk about during the dinner. I would like to thank all of our panelists and commentators.